So we're just past 1 o'clock. I'll just start off by what I really want to do is say a really huge thank you to Christopher Gleadle, who's he's our co-founder of the Paddy Ashdown Policy and Research Forum. He used his vast knowledge and his little black book full of all his friends, and we managed to get the best people in the world to come along and talk to us and explore what we really want to talk about as a new idea to start thinking differently about how world trade works. I'm working with a lot of companies at the moment that are deciding not to trade any longer and feeling that the whole issue around the US tariffs is making things so difficult that they're really struggling to understand what to do next. And I really wanted just to take some time to talk to some experts from 3 of the biggest areas that we all should be doing more work with, and talk to them and say, what are we doing? What's it like? How's life impacting on you at the moment? And think it through. So I'm just going to introduce everybody, not in any particular order, because I've got Alva Finn here. They're smiling at us now, from ELF. She's the executive director at the European Liberal Forum. And she's had over 14 years of experience in policy. Alva has led transformative work across social, equality, and humanitarian sectors. From her leadership at a social platform, Europe's largest civil society network, to pivotal roles at Save the Children, Mental Health Europe, and even representing Ireland at the UN in Geneva. Her experience is inspiring and impactful as she is. So we're really looking forward to hear what she's got to say. I also like to introduce Marcelo Regúnaga, and we have him down as a visionary global trade and bioeconomic expert. So my goodness, he's the general coordinator of a group of producing countries from the Southern Cone, a councillor member of the Argentine Council for International Relations. He brings unmatched experience in trade, the bioeconomy, and international relations. You're very welcome here. Thank you, Marcelo. And then finally, we have Dr. Laia Comerma. She's a postdoctorate researcher at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy, specializing in EU and China relations, global economic governance, and foreign policy analysis. Her groundbreaking work delves into how norms, rules, and institutions are transforming under the influence of trade, investment, and development infrastructure. And hopefully we'll be able to get some really great ideas from what's going on around the world. So you're all very welcome. And we want to run this in terms of a conversation. So I want everybody who's online to be able to feel that they can put a question in when we're chatting, or if not a question when we're chatting, when we open it up, we can talk and allow people to put their hands up and engage with us on some of these topics that are going on. It's just a huge area. We're allowing ourselves about an hour, but honestly, we know that we could carry on for weeks if we really put our mind to it. But let's try and keep everything sort of high level, unless there's anything specific that needs to go into a huge detail. So I've written some questions, and I'm going to start off with sort of diversifying trade partnerships beyond the US, because I think it's on the top of everybody's mind at the moment. With the rise of the US tariffs and growing trade in uncertainties, how are the Mercosur, EU, and Asian, sorry, not ASEAN, because that's a different trading bloc, Asian economies leveraging new trade agreements to reduce dependency on the US market and foster more resilient global supply chains? Now, Alva, would you like to start with that?
Yes, sure. We are, I think, going to focus on Africa from the European Liberal Forum point of view. We just wrote a piece focused on increasing trade overall, but also kind of win-win partnership with Africa. from our recent trip that we made to Abidjan, where we were with Renew Europe colleagues, FNF, and Liberals from Africa, where we discussed having a more equitable partnership with Africa, including in light of the changes that have been happening. It was before Liberation Day. That only makes the input more important. Once I finish speaking, I'll also drop the paper in there so you can see it. And the idea basically is that Africa has significant raw materials that are often taken from Africa and exploited and utilized and turned into the end product actually in Europe. And this is creating, this is actually slowing down, for example, things like the clean transition, fighting climate change. If you look at just one raw material that's really important, like cobalt, about 50% of cobalt reserves are in Africa, and 70% of cobalt production is happening there. But then the end product, which is used for batteries and also electric vehicles, for example, a lot of that happens elsewhere. So basically, we're still having this type of relationship with Africa in terms of trade, where we're exploiting their raw materials, and we're adding a lot of the value on in Europe and other places. So one of the things that we discussed when we were in Abidjan is how to fix this problem, and we came up with a few ideas, and also how to use the experience of the European Union in order to have a common free trade area and free market area in Africa, which would make it actually much easier for us also to have a completely free trade agreement between the African Union and the European Union. So those are some of the ideas. We also touched upon an idea of having co-owned centers of excellence focused specifically on clean technology. So at the moment, we do have centers of excellence that are funded by the European Union, but they're not co-owned. What we think would be actually a step forward in the relationship is to have a few centers closest to where the raw materials are, where we could have African and also European scientists working together in order to exploit and also refine these raw materials in Africa. And that will actually be a win-win situation, because we'll be able to make sure that we are utilizing as fast as possible the raw materials that we need for the green transition. And the last thing, last chapter that we had was really on market segmentation for European markets in Africa. We see that it is happening, but not as much as it could be. And this means that obviously European products aren't getting to market in Africa, and there's a lot of competition now in the African market. So while we used to be the largest trading partner in the past, now that's rather, if you look at African exports to the EU, but if you look the other way, we are not actually maximizing our market segmentation as Europeans in Africa. So if you think of Renault, for example, they have a brand that is only marketed in Africa. There are also other examples like Unilever using vegetable fat powder, has been very successful. Also simplified solar panels used for off-grid purposes, because we know that the grid isn't as advanced in some African countries. So it can also really help the African market get access to higher quality European goods without the price tag, which really stops our products from getting to market there.
Yeah, well, that's a great starting point. Thanks very much indeed. And I think, I think everybody's very keen to work with Africa. And I always, we always sort of lump it all together, of course, but there are 54 countries there, and they are 54 very specific, needs and 54 different ideas that you have to work with when you're working with them. So I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that, Alva. We can make sure that gets around to the people who have joined as well. So Marcelo, what about the Mercosur markets? What are they doing with the US behaving in the way they are?
Well, actually, thank you very much for the invitation. We are really concerned about all the destroy of the multilateral system. I think we are facing a lack of governance on trade and environment issues. And I find that these trade restrictions just reward inefficiencies. We find that food security, climate change are global problems, and we need global solutions. And then we find that we need to reveal some architecture in terms of how we can deal and recreate some confidence, at least in those countries that believe in this idea of governance, international governance. In this sense, we find that the free trade agreement between the European Union and Mercosur could be one of the steps for that. We find also Mercosur has a trade agenda that is being pushed right now, and we should be considering also some kind of trade relations with Asian countries. And at the end of the day, I think we should rethink how plurilaterally we can rebuild some trade architecture to find if we can reach global solutions. In that sense, Mercosur is a relevant part of the global solutions because we have abundant natural resources. Our production system has been improved during the last 30 years, and now we have a very efficient and sustainable production system. We find that many countries in the world, like the Europeans and Asians, need to reform their production systems, and we have the surplus and the capacity because we have been increasing productivity during the last 20 years with sustainable production systems, so we can contribute for the transition. So for all that reasons, we think that we need to continue this kind of dialogues and try to find to what extent there could be second best instead of the WTO agreement. At the end of the day, we already think that WTO was not working well, but the solution is not to destroy, it's how to rebuild the new.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And then, finally, Laia, what an incredible circumstance. So talking about China in particular, I suppose, because I know your expertise goes across China and Europe. China, what are we going to do? Because they seem to be, doing so many great things that we didn't realize they were doing, I think. Africa in particular, they've been very active, haven't they?
Yeah, I will briefly talk about China, and then I will try to zoom out to Asia as well, because I think it's an important perspective to have. I think that in terms of China, I think that what we have seen is that it has capitalized on all the chaos coming from Liberation Day. For me, there's just one very single trip that is very illustrative of Xi Jinping's approach to the global trade regime and how it has made use of the chaos that the tariffs created among the trading partners in Asia of the United States. And it was that immediately after Liberation Day, Xi Jinping decided to go on a trip to some Southeast Asian countries, and it made very significant promises of increased trade and infrastructure deals. It signed several sectoral cooperation agreements, and basically it repeated the claim that China was there for them. And I think that resonated among those countries. At the same time, I think that we should not overstate the effect that this might have on Chinese soft power in that region. Because those countries were also the most cautious when responding to the tariffs imposed by the United States, that they did not retaliate. They waited to see what would happen. And in the end, we saw that that was rewarded by Trump when it mentioned like the countries that had not retaliated would have this 90-day pause, and he would start negotiations with them. In the end, Trump is a transactionalist, I would say, so it has also reduced significantly the tariffs towards China. That was the country that retaliated the most. We should remember the level that the US-China tariffs reached to over 120%. So I think that we see this contrast between the isolationist attitude of the United States, particularly in the very beginning of the mandate of the second Trump mandate, which I think it's changing, versus the approach towards redoubled multilateralism in Europe, Mercosur, and Asia, where particularly we see that the European Union has started to renegotiate agreements, trade agreements that had been on hold for many years. And if we look at the list of trade agreements that are currently being negotiated by the EU, all of them are in Asia. And I think that's very significant, including with very significant Asian powers like India, that where it had been negotiating for over 5 years, the trade agreement, it had been paused in 2013, and now negotiations have been restarted since 2022. We find also Australia, we find also the Philippines, so very significant powers in Asia. So I think that in a global, Marcelo mentioned the global trade architecture. In this global trade architecture, where we see a WTO in crisis, a retreat from the United States, wars that challenge the resilience of supply chains, I think that it's important to see this attitude towards protecting multilateralism by the three blocks that we are currently discussing today.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is fascinating, isn't it? And also it's interesting to see the way diplomacy is being used as well. And actually one of the big things I think we noticed as outside, as observers, really recognizing the different cultures that we're all dealing with and understanding how they want to operate and how you speak to them. It seemed to have been lost along the way somewhere, but I think it's a really important part of what we're trying to achieve here, isn't it? So thank you for that. I think that sort of really starts to begin to make some sense. So again, if we could just sort of think about sort of Mercosur for a little while, we're just wondering sort of which of the sectors within the Mercosur markets are positioned to really capitalize on the expanded access to European and Asian markets. We want to look at it the other way around as well, but we'll just look at it from Mercosur's point of view in terms of, agribusiness, manufacturing, and digital services. What do you think, Marcelo?
Well, I think Mercosur has an enormous potential to provide to Asia and Europe, and particularly in the trade agreement with Europe, not only in food and all the agricultural products, but also in oil and gas. Now, since the crisis with Russia, we have enormous capacity to provide gas and oil for Europe. And in addition to that, Argentina, Brazil, all the countries have very important mining resources. Some of them like copper, some lithium, and many others that are crucial now for all the energy transition strategies. So this is another area in which we can think investments coming to Mercosur. In addition to that, we have a long story in biofuels, in the traditional biofuels, but now we are getting also in the new biofuels like the biojet. I think in Mercosur, our strategy is mainly still keep working with biofuels and not just going to electric systems. And we find that this is a good opportunity, and now we are getting also in all the what we need for the international flights with the biojets. So this is an opportunity that Mercosur can provide to the world. On the other hand, we find that Mercosur countries need to modernize their manufacturing systems and need to rebuild the global value chains in terms of cars and many other manufacturing activities, the same as the bioeconomy developments. Europe has a long story and capacity in terms of bioeconomy developments. I think we have the natural resources, you have the technology, then there are plenty of opportunities for investment. So we find that the Mercosur European Trade Agreement is not just a trade agreement. We find that it's more important for what we can do in terms of investments and in general the policy issues to recreate as I was mentioning before. So we find that we need to have a complete agreement to provide not just some more trade.
Yeah, brilliant. I think you're absolutely right. I think it's I think a lot of this is all driving back to this the World Trade Organization was set up to support us all and to actually get behind this. And obviously it's struggling at the moment and effectively being attacked at the moment as well. So it's a good point. So Alva, what do you think from the point of view of the EU? Where do you see the opportunities within the Mercosur area? Seem to be on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, if you look at it overall, yes, we are probably going to gain a lot from the Mercosur deal. I think the remaining issues are really on some areas that have already been indicated by Marcelo. I think actually when we last discussed this in the Parliament, I think some of the residual reticence has weakened as a result of the tariff war. So also if we're going to have barriers between us and other trading partners who were formerly quite strong, then absolutely we need to diversify. And I think that's actually the biggest strength now is for us, if we want to be kind of independent in some ways from an economic point of view from the US, but also China, then Mercosur is a kind of no-brainer. However, there are still some issues to resolve. I mean, there's the whole idea of mirror clauses, also food standards. Yeah, these are things, for example, I'm from Ireland, and always when I talk to our Irish MEPs, they're just really, yeah, I mean, they're very doubtful about how this will impact beef farmers, for example, and also the kinds of products that will then come onto the market here. However, I don't think that will be something that completely stops it in the end, given that the overall environment has changed massively. So for me, it's actually the diversification that has the biggest economic benefit at the moment, even more so than it did before Christmas when von der Leyen went and was negotiating it.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the areas around the trade liberalization that they're coming up with are very interesting. And I think, yes, of course, agriculture is a huge element there, but, they're actually creating a lot more in terms of digital transformations within the Mercosur markets as well, which, of course, could mean that we could all collaborate a lot more closely when they're doing that. And I'm sort of wondering, Laia, if that's where where do we fit in with the plans for the Asian markets as well?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting is that the three areas that you identified like as key opportunities in the Mercosur agreement are renewable energy, critical raw materials, and food exports. Yeah. And I think that it's interesting to see that 2 out of the 3 is areas where the EU is currently highly dependent on China, like with heavy critical raw materials. The EU relies on China, in some cases even on the 100% of its imports. Often it's over 80%. So if we look at the Critical Raw Materials Act that the EU approved, if we really want to get to those targets before 2030, we need to rely on other markets. And I think that here Asian markets can play a key role. Also, if we look at the renewable energy, many years ago, I think it was in 2015, the EU tried to impose tariffs on solar panels coming from China. It did not manage to. I think it's one of the biggest failures from the EU side in its trade with China, in its power, regulatory power, if you want to call it like this. So what is the role that other Asian markets can play in these diversification efforts? I think that it will be the key in the implementation of those targets from the EU side, and also in this reconfiguration of global trading networks, that those will involve Mercosur as well. To what extent can Mercosur provide those goods, those materials to the EU? I am not an expert on that. I do not know. I do know that it's quite difficult to excavate those materials, so it takes a long time. But if we look at other more technological goods like renewable energy, or definitely food exports in the case of Mercosur, but I think that there are some sectors where the Asian markets can play a key role. And overall, I would say that it will strengthen the trade links between those 3 regions overall. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I mean, I'm just wondering if we all have the courage to think differently about the way we're going to move forward, whether it's going to be a question that we just follow the same patterns that we've always set, and whether perhaps we rethink about how the WTO is set up and how we can do things, or, whether or not we're just going to start, working with the agreements that we've already got in place and build on them, and perhaps make it much more easy to do business with those countries.
Yeah, to me, it's 2 different things. Like, I think that they will probably run in parallel. I think that there are initiatives, and there will be initiatives on the reform of the WTO. The US is not keen on them as of now, especially under the Trump administration. So to me, one thing is the global institutional architecture, and the other is the global trade architecture, if I can call it like this. Yeah. I do see it evolving towards a more flexible, less institutionalized, more ad hoc cooperative kind of trading architecture, which might be good for some of those countries, especially the ones that do not have the regulatory and bureaucratic capacity of the European Union. So I do not think that this necessarily means less interactions, less globalization, although that could be one possibility, but it will be essentially different than what we had until now, just because the United States is such a relevant global actor, and China is also quite critical of the global governance architecture in some areas, although it has advocated for global institutions like WTO and the United Nations.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's really beginning to seem that, as we are transitioning into a different era, and hopefully this will start to make more sense. I sort of really just wanted to think about a little bit, especially with the EU, Alva, where we're talking about sort of the green transitions and digital transitions, and how we really understand how they work. So I wondered if you had any points that, we've got the Paris Agreement, and we've got various other sustainable development issues. You're just on mute, Alva. And I'm wondering if you could have a little chat with us around those subjects, because obviously, all 3 areas that we're talking about, unfortunately, we have this a problem where we need to accelerate the both the digitalization and the green aspects of it all. And I'm wondering how the trade tariffs are going to really impact this sort of war that's going on, is going to impact on being able to get that legislation through.
So we are now seeing some of the legislation being revisited from a business point of view. At the moment, we just also saw that the Commission want to retract the Green Claims Directive. This is something that our group in the European Parliament, the Renew Europe group, doesn't like, actually, because the idea behind the Green Claims Directive is that it's meant to provide consumers with the information that they need when they're buying green products. There is an overall new reflection on the direction of the Green Deal at European level. Also, some of the directives around reporting against sustainability standards have been delayed or changed significantly. There's also the Simplification Omnibus, which is a piece of legislation that is meant to make a lot more simplification for business going forward. In some ways, some people would say that it will actually make it easier for some green businesses to move forward, whereas others would say that maybe this is going to delay the green transition. From a digitalization point of view, of course, a lot of tech companies are both Chinese and from the US. So tariffs on the tech sector will delay digitalization unless we can really invest in our own homegrown. So that's creating a dialogue here at EU level that we need more tech sovereignty, that we need to rely less on others and have, as I said, homegrown tech industry, as we are really reliant on, the big platforms at the moment here. So this is definitely a conversation here. A lot. We're also having discussions around what's called the Digital Networks Act, whether or not we can merge some big telecoms companies to make it easier and faster and probably not cheaper, but have better networks here, digital networks. From the European Liberal Forum point of view, we're also suggesting maybe that when we use cohesion policy in the future, we can have an entire territorial strategy for Europe that looks at a few different things, including digitalization. So we don't actually really cooperate much on, like, from a European point of view, a European Union point of view, on things like satellite or submarine cables and that kind of thing. These are all things that we will have to secure moving forward in this more multipolar world. So definitely for those agendas that you've just talked about, things are not as clear as they were in the last mandate, for better or for worse. But I think also perhaps some of the things that we did in the last term were not actually realistic. So we can see that the Commission is now slowly saying that we won't be able to hit some of the targets on the basis of what we have now. What we've also been pushing for as Liberals is more tech neutrality. So even if some of the Green Deal was good on the face of it, there were some things or decisions that were taken, for example, around the combustion engine, these kind of decisions of like ending the use of the combustion engine to reach net zero, that we would say actually put the cart before the horse. And actually, even if you talk to people in transport, for example, like heavy duty transport industry, they're saying it's just not possible. Even though they're using everything, the infrastructure just is not there in terms of battery, etc., for them to be able to do long haul transport under the current regime. So there is definitely a look now at what is a pragmatic approach to the green transition. Also, we had CBAM has now been decided, which is the carbon border mechanism. That's another thing I think that we've been making, because it would just be unfair if the EU adopted the Green Deal while everybody else continues doing what they're doing, right? So
Yeah.
we'll also see what the impact is there.
And I suppose what I'm really interested in is how we manage, you as the EU managed to do all that whilst trying to ensure that everyone has market access in some shape or form, and competitiveness as well. And I'm wondering, you know, perhaps Laia, perhaps you might be able to talk a little bit around how these sort of initiatives are seen, especially in the Asian markets.
Yeah, I think that the Asian markets do want to capitalize on those initiatives from the European Union, and we see that particularly in trade agreements, which is what we are discussing today. If we look at sustainable development provisions, chapters, also including in some cases digital provisions, they are quite present in agreements between the EU and Asian countries, to the extent that the compatibility between the two partners' economies allows. This is something that has been a priority for the EU for a long time, also because of treaty obligations. The EU has to promote several values, but we see that the Asian countries have been quite open to collaborate with the EU on those areas. So we see quite ambitious commitment on sustainable development and green transitions, also because they see it as a trade opportunity, right?
Of course.
We see that trade networks are quite intertwined in Asia. So in some cases, they in most cases, they do not involve just the indigenous industry of one country, but that country being capitalizing on the cooperation with the EU in order to be able to develop its domestic industry in some levels. And if we look domestically, we see that several countries are making this push to upgrade their economies and be able to escape in this way the middle income trap. We see that this is becoming increasingly difficult at the global level. So we see, for example, Indonesia, the Philippines trying to capitalize on those industries and developing those industries at home, for example, electric vehicles, and develop those trade links with developed countries, and particularly the EU. The EU is a very big developed market, so they are really interested in developing those kind of links and help the EU be able to make these transitions, which is obviously not a priority for them, but it will be a consequences. And if the EU, I think, as Alva said, if the EU wants to make these transitions, it will need to it's impossible that we make all this at home domestically, but it will mean diversification. It will involve also friendshoring. So this is what the Asian countries are counting on.
Yeah. And I suppose very similarly, the same with you, Marcelo.
Well, in terms of the green transition, first, we don't know now, with all the change in budgets in Europe, to what extent many of the green strategies are going to continue. However, I think there is a very important issue that I want to raise. Agriculture is the single sector in which, in terms economically, we can sequester carbon. The other sectors, that the targets are just to be neutral in 2050. If this is the case, I think we should change the European strategy, trying to penalize when you are emitting carbon. I think we should look more at incentives to sequester carbon, because we need to create the protocols, and we need to work together to find out in which activities we can sequester carbon and develop the carbon markets, and also if there are going to be subsidies, how to deliver the subsidies, being sure that there is not greenwashing or other issues. So we need to be more transparent, to work together to find out which are the best ways to measure. But at the end of the day, we can have a lot of activities in Mercosur countries in which we can sequester carbon with good agricultural practices, with forestation, and many other recuperation of land that has been degraded, and all of this. In all of these, we have alternatives to sequester carbon, but we should change the mind of penalizing. We should try to think how we can create incentives for that. And this could have a very big impact in terms of how countries should change their production systems. For instance, just to go to Europe, you are, in most of the cases, we are not using no-till systems. You are destroying the land every year. And this means, because you don't have an incentive to sequester carbon. If you should have an incentive to sequester carbon, probably a lot of farmers would find that they will have some income coming from sequestration and good agricultural practices that are not being used. So in this sense, I think we have a big challenge, and this again is through a better dialogue instead of just imposition of unilateral measures.
Okay, well, that's an interesting thought. Alva, do you have something to say about that, or about his idea that you need to be doing more within the European Union to sequester the carbon that's going through? I thought you were doing quite a lot myself, but I didn't really understand.
Yes, we are also through the Common Agricultural Policy. We're about to actually launch a position on this as ELF, also how we can incentivize better land usage through the Common Agricultural Policy, which is not, we would say, utilized to the fullest, and actually it rewards land mass rather than land use. But still, yes, CAP is now even currently being used for that, not at the rates that it could be, but I assume we'll see a bit of an improvement of that in the next CAP reform. But yeah, still, we can sequester a lot of carbon from the EU side, but again, we also need to balance what other people are doing and make sure that we're doing the shift along with others. Because just the European Union doing it alone is not enough. Exactly.
And that's the whole thing, isn't it, really? I suppose it takes me on to the next point that I just wanted to sort of try and touch on, because again, these are massive topics that we're trying to talk through. Navigating the political and the regulatory challenges around all of this, somehow or other. Everything we start, given the complex sort of regulatory and ratification processes that we all have, I wonder if there's an argument to say that we should be thinking along in terms of sort of adding some elements to our trade agreements so that it makes it easier to pull them through, because it makes it more attractive. But also, how are we going to address these challenges moving forward? Because we need more speed in the way we operate. And I think we've seen such a great example of this sort of cutting things and just acting fast. And I know that isn't necessarily, I'm not suggesting it's the way that we should always behave, but it seems like things are moving faster than they used to. And I wonder how quickly we can actually adapt to these challenges. What about you, Leia? Where would you feel on that?
Sorry, I was muted.
It's fine.
I think here two forces will kind of come into play, and those will be opposing forces. I think that all those challenges that we have been discussing today require us to act promptly, but it will because of the kind of the path dependencies, if I can call it like that, it won't be that easy to reconfigure several trade links in our supply chains, etc. It will take some years, even if going at the most simple argument, but there are contracts, even energy contracts, that run for decades. So it's just not easy to get out of those. So how we will reconcile this need of achieving those strategies by 2030, 2050, while we deal with those challenges that will require us to be more flexible and adapt to the changing global environment more quickly. This will be the challenge. And if we look at the European Union, that has often been criticized for its bureaucracy and its tardiness in responding to several challenges, I think that this will be the challenge of the coming decade. And I think that we have proven that we can do it. We did it as a response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, particularly in the area of energy and security. I think that there have been some also leaps in the area of defense and security. We are doing it now in the area of tariffs and trade as a response to Liberation Day. There might be other challenges that come. I don't want to here call any kind of backlash, if I can call it this, but we might see a Chinese attack towards Taiwan in the coming years. What would that mean for our trade with China would be much more significant than for our trade with Russia. So how we will reconcile these two forces, I do not know, but it will be the challenge for our policymakers if we also want to deal with our domestic or also issues, including our societies are getting older, so our demographic challenges, our inflation, our slower growth, and while being faithful to our values of open markets, free trade, human rights, democracies, etc. This will be the challenge for democracies, and particularly the European Union, but also Mercosur and several Asian countries in the coming decade.
Brilliant. And I think at this point, I've got a list of questions and ideas to talk through with you as long as my arm. But I wonder if we should throw this open and see if anybody has any questions within the audience. If you could just say who you are and what your question is, that would be really great. Obviously take yourself off mute, ideally. It'll work better that way, I promise. Oops. I can hear microphones going on and off. Is there anybody with any question that they wanted to ask? Okay, in which case I'm going to go on to my next question. Do by all means come on and say if you want. And I suppose, because we've been talking about trade, we always, whenever you're talking about trade, it always overlaps into a lot of different areas. It has to, because trade doesn't happen in isolation. It happens because you're manufacturing. It happens because you're creating carbon, because you're using fossil fuels, because you're doing all sorts of things. There's a huge area around that. But I just really wanted to think about responding to the sort of global trade fragmentation that's happening, because in this world of trade in particular, it's becoming increasingly protectionist in its policies, and I'm wondering what strategies the Mercosur, the EU, the Asian markets can adopt to champion open markets and to try inclusive growth rather than, the protectionism that people are looking at, and really what lessons we think we've learned from the current US approach. I know that's a big question, but I did give everybody a little bit of warning on this. Marcelo, would you like to start?
Well, I would like to say that we have been implementing protectionist policies during the last 80 years or more. So and the results have been terrible. I think in terms of how I see and how we see in our country, Trump's policies is, at the end of the day, they will be less competitive and they will lose competitiveness vis-a-vis China and other countries. We in Mercosur are trying to move to other strategy in which we should reduce protectionist policies. Now it's difficult because many countries are returning to protectionist in some industrial policies, so it's not so easy. When we were moving towards a more open and competitive system, we are facing difficulties coming from overseas. But in any case, I think through trade agreements, and what we are trying to push now is more aggressive, conclude the European Union, but then we have a long list, including trade agreements with different countries. These are in Asia, also in the oil sectors like Arabia Saudita or Saudi Arabia or Emirates and these countries. And what we find is while we build a new global architecture, we should be working with second best alternatives like the free trade agreements. But at the end of the day, we think we need high political meetings to begin to discuss how we can rebuild the global trading system.
Yes, I agree. I think that's we've got a few big questions there, haven't we? Alva, how about you? You know, what are you thinking? I mean, obviously Europe has even got their individual members who are now thinking in terms of protectionism. You know, well, we were both in Budapest, a wonderful example of of non-liberalization. Where do you think we're going with all this? How can we build this inclusivity and open up our borders at the same time? You know, we really do need to learn from Trump, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're looking at the Draghi report at the moment. So we have a couple of high-level reports from former Italian PMs that we're really using as liberals here to push for not a completely protectionist approach. I think there are some areas where it does make sense from a strategic point of view, including for defense and security at the moment, where we can have like buy European rules, or and that would also include maybe like UK, right? Like having our close European NATO members included in that, because actually there are some security our arms and weapons and things like that we just don't have the capacity for building within the European Union itself. However, we still think that the best thing to do for the European market is to have competitive free trade with others. So, for example, you also see, we didn't talk too much about it today, but India is also a place where the EU is now courting quite heavily for that market diversification. That being said, obviously the playing field needs to be even. So I think we're doing a lot of work, for example, with Africa to basically, really make it much easier to also trade in the African market in general, which will then make it easier for the EU to trade with Africa. So digitalization of customs, these kind of things, like the European Union is actually leading in this area of like making trade much more smooth. So I think it's not only a response to protectionism, but there are other barriers to trade that we are taking on that can make things much more smooth. And we already have a lot of low tariffs trade globally. Obviously, Mercosur will be one of the next ones. But yeah, we have already reduced massively our or tariff barriers with Africa and other countries. Non-tariff barriers are also something that we need to look at. Customs being one. And we really saw an improvement of that over COVID, but it's not. These things take constant care and attention, especially when you're trading with new partners. I think that this protectionism narrative does have a place occasionally. As I said, like securitized approach to our defense market isn't a bad thing at the moment while we try to rearm.
I agree. And Leia.
Yeah, to me, like learning from Trump, it depends on how we understand learning, because learning, I would say,
we learn from good examples and bad examples.
Exactly, how not to do things. Because I think that it's not a Trump 2.0 thing. It was very, very present during the Biden administration, and I think it already started in the previous Trump administration and possibly earlier, is the return of industrial policy. It's something that in Europe we're not that familiar with, but I think it's just here to stay, industrial policy. And I think that from the second Trump administration, and particularly Liberation Day and these across the board tariffs, but also I would say more the style of the negotiation of the administration and the approach towards global trade. I think that what we have learned is that you really cannot go at it alone. And I think this is what the United States saw. Also, it has also been present with those wars. Trump said it would finish the two wars in Ukraine in one day, and also Israel, and now there's 3 wars. So I think that it's not that easy. But what we have seen, what the administration has possibly seen, or what we have seen from Europe and Asia and potentially Mercosur, is that if a completely protectionist approach just harms your own domestic economy. And this is how we saw the stock markets react in the United States. And we saw many experts in the United States making predictions of the implications that this would have for the US domestic industry. It's just not possible to bring manufacturing back with the conditions that we currently have in our own developed economies. So you need to create a smart strategy that, yes, you don't have dependencies that might cost you in the future, like the ones that we had with Russia, or the ones that we have on critical raw minerals with China. But this does not mean following a protectionist approach. And this is what the allies realized, and this is why we saw this redoubling on trade agreements with our partners, on meetings, so kind of more informal structures that I was mentioning before. So what we have learned from the US approach is the consequences that these have, and what are the potential consequences of these protectionist measures that Alva was mentioning, because we have enacted several of them in the European Union, and several experts have warned us of the potential dangers of those tools that could be hijacked by populist leaders, etc. So they need to be managed in a way that is faithful to the principles of open markets and free trade. So I would keep those 2 messages from what has happened in this last year.
Brilliant.
Half a year, because it's only been 6 months. It seems like forever, but it has actually
only
been 6 months.
I know, I'm exhausted. Absolutely. So as far as the fragmentation is concerned, I appreciate that we're all trying very hard to find other alternatives, and I really hope that, having listened to this and listened to the way we're all working together, and we all actually had very similar ideas and, different markets in mind that we really need to remember. I think it was the Mexican president said there were 7 billion other people to do business with other than the United States. And, perhaps we are as a representative, a few of us, to actually talk this through. So thank you all so very much. Yes, Merlin, we've already asked everybody if they'd like to put some questions there. So if anybody does have any other questions, by all means do. And yes, yeah, Linda.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for listening to your separate views there. Very interesting. And thank you, Lesley, for letting me know about this event and whatever. I'm fascinated by the concept of leadership and how we choose our leaders, and when we put them in, whether it's populist or whether it's sort of like through the ranks and whatever. And I'd like to sort of step back and think about our supply chain of future leaders. Where do we get them? How do we train people to be adept at negotiating, about having the right education to see how the world should or could work? And I just wonder your thoughts about, if there was a school of place for leaders, or do we already have one, or don't we, or whatever? How do we nurture the people with gravitas and foresight and empathy with our issues?
Wow. Well, I mean, Marcelo, do you want to start with that? I mean, South America seems to have some of the best leaders, don't they? I mean,
it's very hard to say because we have been electing many of these kind of people. But I wanted to mention something. Trump is going to be 3 more years, and the trade architecture is for many years. So I think that during this time, we shouldn't follow his policies, but try to rebuild. Because at the end of the day, I find that the U.S. Community and politicians will find that they need to reconsider and return to what has been very good for the economic development of the world, but particularly to the economic development of the U.S. So I think we shouldn't be following his policies. We should be the rest of the world that is not willing to, that believes on trade, believes on competitiveness. We should work. I think this kind of meetings that with think tanks, and then trying to find out through meetings with high-level politicians, we should try to discuss which could be the roadmap for the long term. And the roadmap for the long term shouldn't be just look at how we follow Trump policies.
Of course, and I think we all agree that it's just finding what we do need to do is have a map better trade and better ways of trading together, because it does keep us together instead of fighting wars, trading together. Alva, I know you have a hard quarter past, so is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, we work a lot with MEPs in the European Parliament to talk to them about free trade. Also, about the agenda for Africa, but also with Asia. So, yeah, I mean, we are doing this as the European Liberal Forum, really working with leaders to, uphold free trade globally. Of course, it's a little bit difficult because in some political environments, this is politicized. Some actors are almost forced by their electorate to take harsher positions than others. So I think we're a little bit safer in terms of that in the European Union because we have many people and we have a kind of consensus or even unanimity approach. So we are really trying to do it through dialogue. But I mean, remember, this is not the first time that we've gone through through this process as the European Union already with Trump. This is obviously the tariffs are much more difficult this time around, but it's not our first rodeo. So actually there are kind of like cooler heads here, I think. Also, there's a lot of US companies present in Europe contributing to our economy and that kind of thing. So we are also advising cooler heads, but sometimes, a sort of political statement needs to be made. But you can see, I think the overall approach in comparison to the EU and China is completely different, right? Because we know we probably are able to negotiate a bit more. I think the Chinese are in a completely different situation. So not all tariffs and not all partners are alike. But in terms of like having leaders who understand these things, I think we're much better placed actually than other groups who sometimes are saying things that are not so helpful. And we also have a commissioner in charge of industry and competitiveness within our group who is French. Sometimes they take a more protectionist approach, and actually I think it's organizations like the European Liberal Forum that can sometimes balance this out a bit. So yes, we're doing everything that we can to help, but if you have any other ideas, you let us know. And the other thing is the EU-UK relationship could be strengthened. I mean, we're seeing baby steps now, but I think if you look at it from the EU perspective, we would have assumed that we would go much more quickly towards something a little bit more strengthened with the UK. I think some of the agreements that have been achieved right now are sort of the baseline level of getting our relationship back on track. But anyway, we can see baby steps happening.
Yeah, and we're very excited about that. You know, it's as you say, it's beginning to take some sort of shape. But also, of course, we have to remember that there are still people out there that are angry. So we have to remember that populism became very, very rife in our country, so we have to remember how that works. And so it leads me to take you to China and Asia as having the final word, because honestly I think China and Asia are probably going to be the strongest part. I remember Obama trying to create the trade partnership agreement with China and everybody at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and everyone shouting and saying this is terrible, we mustn't do it. But I think he was right, wasn't he? You guys are slowly coming to being so powerful that we need to listen very hard to what you've got to say.
Well, I think here I can only speak for China, but I think honestly China has the upper hand on this. Why? Because in the West, sadly, we have very little knowledge on China and of China as compared to the knowledge that China has on us. And this is because for many, many decades, China has been sending its leaders to be educated in Western institutions. And those leaders still to this day, because of books that I have written and different sources, still to this day, they read what we say about them. They follow Western politics, and they are equipped through language, through, the knowledge that they acquired on our political systems and our economies, to understand that we do not have that in the West, or at least we do not to the same extent. We don't have enough sinologists, enough experts on Chinese politics, on Chinese economy, and especially that they can read on Chinese sources so that they can know what's going on in China through Chinese sources. I think that we're starting to promote that and slowly catch up on that, but there's definitely an information asymmetry there. So China has the upper hand when negotiating with Western leaders, just because of this very depth knowledge that they have on us. But I would like to mention just two very final points because I know we're short on time. One is the different cultures. I think that this is something that leaders need to appreciate. And I do know, like in the case of China, but there's a very different political culture that you need to abide by if you want to really respect and find understanding with Chinese leaders. It's a completely different way to deal with them. And you cannot just force Western styles and tools of negotiation on China, because they are just not going to work. They are going to generate backlash, as they have done so many times. And the last thing is that I would mention, Alva has very importantly mentioned capacity building, which is what probably our leaders need. But also, to me, there's the other side of our political systems, and there's the side of representation and accountability. And us as the voters, the society, the ones that keep check on our leaders, should be the ones that first choose the leaders that abide by those by those principles when negotiating, and second, that do reward them when they act as such. So we should really try to equip our societies to don't fall for populist narratives and extremist narratives that we see also in Europe gaining traction. So
absolutely. And of course, the thing that I would like to say is, of course, the Paddy Ashdown Policy and Research Forum that's brought this conversation to you. Our aim is to connect global voices from the East and the West to tackle the biggest issues of the time, the climate, inequality, conflict, and technological disruptions that we're all facing, within trade, but within healthcare and within, society in general. And of course, we're trying to, combine these bold ideas with the real world in actions. We're trying to think of delivering some solutions. So I'm hoping that we can think about the conversation we had today and take it a little bit further. And of course, in the spirit of Lord Ashdown, Paddy Ashdown, who started this, we're not just building a policy, we're building a bridge across from the East to the West to build a better world. Thank you all so very, very much for joining us. It's been so interesting. I've loved every minute of it, and hopefully we can do some more and we can come to you more often. We can talk again. Alva, thank you. Laia and Marcelo, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.